But the big one that everyone's waiting for right now is, of course, Nvidia, and the idea that the AI trade really hinges on what Nvidia says about the outlook, what it says about whether its fundamental perception of the opportunities have changed because of DeepSeek.
Absolutely. And of course, the stakes are high. The street looking for 73% growth in Nvidia's revenue. That would take it to about $38 billion. And they expect that on a quarterly basis to get up to $42 billion for the current first quarter that we're in right now. Danielle Shay joins us, Danielle Shay joins us, Vice President of Options at Simpler Trading. And Danielle, we've been talking a lot here about the AI trade and whether it was over or just interrupted, whether there was a reset to it. I know we haven't gotten the big numbers out of Nvidia yet, but do you think there's life left in that big cap AI trade?
Absolutely, I do. I think that right now the NASDAQ is just consolidating. Last year we had a very strong year with Nvidia, but I love the price pattern right now. I think it's in consolidation, and I think that this trade still has a lot of room left to run. We have governments investing in AI. We have companies putting a ton of money here. And I think this is still a hot trade.
Yeah, and obviously investors think it could be either up or down. Options right now implying about a 10% move in the cash session tomorrow based on what we get out of Nvidia in just a few minutes' time. What do you want to actually hear from them? Like, what would be bullish for you to hear?
Well, I think everybody's concerned about DeepSeek, but for me personally, I think that that was a fantastic buying opportunity. Nvidia currently has a bullish pattern on the weekly chart, and what I'd like to see for the reaction to keep Nvidia up above 113. I think that we want to see from Nvidia that they're not concerned about DeepSeek and that cost coming down is actually a good thing rather than a bad thing. I also think that we want to see continued growth, obviously, but I don't think that investors should be surprised if it's not at the same rate as what we saw last year. I think at this point, the earnings moves over the last 3 quarters have been quite a bit smaller. We've seen a 3.5% move, 2.5% move, 7.5% move. And today we have a priced-in move of 10%. So don't be surprised if it's not as exciting as it was last year or as big of a move. But I think that overall, I'm focused on the long-term game plan here, which is a target in Nvidia up at about 165, 180.
Yeah, that deceleration is real, right? Because we're looking at an estimated 73% increase in fourth quarter revenue after 94% increase in the third quarter, and before that, 122% increase in the second quarter revenue. You have pointed out that in 6 of the last 8 quarters, Nvidia gapped higher after its earnings. I'm curious, when you look at options, how much are people positioning for that outcome, even with the shift in sentiment on AI overall?
So it's pretty typical that people position very bullish for Nvidia surrounding earnings. That's generally what we see every quarter, especially because, a lot of retail traders primarily position themselves to the upside, and this is a stock that has a lot of hype. And so oftentimes what you'll see is a move that comes in that's a little bit lower than expected. And so for options traders especially, that can provide an opportunity to sell premium in the options market. So that's something that that's a strategy that I will utilize. And sometimes there is a surprise. Like I said, we have 2 quarters out of the last 8 where Nvidia fell, but you'll notice that after those quarters, as long as that stayed within the expected move, which both of those did, they were great buying opportunities. So me personally, as long as Nvidia is only down 10%, which I know seems like a lot, but that's the expected move. If it was down 10%, I would still consider that a buying opportunity because it would stay within the context of the trend.
Danielle, how are you thinking about how Nvidia frames its outlook? There's a calculus certainly for under-promising, giving a conservative guidance and over-delivering later versus providing some reassurance to perhaps nervous investors.
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I think they do have to under-promise and over-deliver, and I think that they do need to provide reassurance because I think that there's a lot of concern right now over DeepSeek in China, but I think their CEO has already done a pretty good job of combating that, and it's really interesting the way that these CEOs are using social media these days to kind of combat a lot of this news. I noticed that happened, the date of the DeepSeek announcements. So, I'm not really concerned about that because I know that CEOs, when it comes to earnings reports, they know exactly what they need to speak to. And I think we're going to
Yeah.
hear a lot of reassurance with that today.
If we do get that reassurance, do you think that's going to lift some of those secondary AI stocks? I'm kind of talking about going down the list with an Upstart, SoundHound, a Confluent, and UiPath, all those types of names here. Is this going to be sort of a rising tide lifts all boats, or is this just Nvidia in that leather jacket?
NVIDIA is absolutely a rising tide lifts all boats. And that's kind of the concern with it as well, is because if there is some major issue with it, then yes, that could be something to drag down these stocks and the NASDAQ along with it. But, as far as this report is concerned today, the thing that I always do is I look at the expected move, and that's generally how you can determine if that tide is going to lift all boats or sink them. And so, if you get 1.5 times the expected move over earnings, that's generally the point where it's going to be a little bit too much and it's going to impact other companies. And certainly if it's twice the expected move in the options market, that's where things get a little bit crazy. So for example, if it's up 20%, that would be an opportunity where you'd see a huge momentum buy.
Yep.
But down 20%, that's really where it's going to start to drag down the NASDAQ and the rest of those stocks.
All right, Danielle, thank you so much for joining us. Danielle Shay is Vice President of Options at Simpler Trading.